Welcome to the Lost Vet podcast, where we are helping you to get back to your passion and purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Melodie Chan, and in this episode of Destination People, Rob and I are going to do a deeper dive into what it really means to be a coach and how we can embrace that mindset of I know nothing. Have a listen. So, Rob, in one of our previous podcast episodes, the one that we called Training's the Easy Part, but it's the mentoring and coaching that's hard, you
Yeah.
did a really great job of differentiating between those stages of training, mentoring, and coaching. And so I thought, since coaching ends up being 70% of that journey to help somebody along to become competent, independent, even excellent in their role, I thought let's do a deeper dive into that. One of the things you said in that episode that really stuck out to me was that coaching is a non-directive discipline. And I wanted to have you expand on that a little bit more and just explain what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And it's funny because we were just over dinner last night, we were talking about the same subject, because I think it seems like a strange thing to say that something that's essentially supposed to be supporting someone or helping them develop is non-directive. Like, how can you have something that's helping someone where you're actually not contributing advice or guidance? But really, this is to understand that the nature of it is about it's the facilitation of the other person achieving their potential. So if you think about that, you don't have any skin in the game in that journey, because you can't actually do anything for that other person unless they choose to do something for themselves. So I suppose if I could maybe boil it down to a question that you could regularly ask yourself, which is this is not, well, it's not even a question, maybe more of a statement. It's like, this is not my problem, right? And when you're a coach, you have to keep that thought at the center of your mind. This is not my problem. It's not my problem. It's not my problem. Because when we start to give advice, what we do is we partially take ownership of the problem because we're now invested in the solution. So it's the example I gave over dinner last night was, it'd be like driving in a car, like teaching someone to drive a car, but still having one hand on the wheel, right? And you'd have all the appearance of driving a car. The driver will be in the driving seat. They'd have the pedals. They'd have the steering wheel. They'd have all the car would be moving. It'd be on the road. Like, you could look at it and you say, that person is driving. But if you've got that hand on the wheel, that person is not taking full responsibility. And when you do that, what you do in a way is you minimize or you control or you hold back them fulfilling their true potential. And it's probably one of the hardest elements of coaching, is being non-directive. We are addicted to giving advice. We're addicted to telling people what to do. We want to suggest things, especially if you know something about the subject, right? Because you've been there before, you've been around the block, you want to help people, you want to make sure they avoid the pitfalls. So this is why I think, like, when we talk about coaching, coaching is actually really hard. The concept is simple. Okay, the concept is simple. Just ask questions. Maybe use a structure, use a format like Tigro, which I really like. But fundamentally, the ownership has to lie with the person being coached. And that's the beautiful thing about coaching, is that it benefits both parties. It benefits you because you get to relax and release yourself of the responsibility of someone else's problem. And also it allows them to really build that confidence and excitement and positivity about the fact that they can resolve their own issues. So it's probably the hardest part of coaching, is not the questions to ask or the structure to use, but it's the psychological shift of recognizing that you don't have a part to play in them solving their own problems. I suppose the example I've often given, if the person that I'm talking to has children, is that what you want for your children is for them to be strong and independent. And therefore, at some point, you stop picking up after them. At some point, you stop washing their clothes. At some point, you stop providing a roof to go over their head. At some point, you say, go, live, get on with your life. We're not going to be responsible for feeding and clothing and keeping you financially safe. And that's the same responsibility you have as a coach, is to free the person to go and fulfill their own potential, to not be tethered to the coach because the coach has got some idea about what that person should be doing.
I think it's that concept of being okay with letting go then, because I think sometimes people do, whether for whatever reason, wanting to feel like they are relevant or important, not letting go completely so that they feel like they're still that other person that they're quote unquote coaching will still be reliant on them so that they will still need them. I guess that sort of fundamental desire to be wanted or needed.
That's such a good point. And I think, I mean, you've really hit the nail on the head there, because there's an element of ego when you're leading people where we like to be the victim slightly. We like to feel that this place couldn't run without me. We like to say things like, if I don't do it myself, no one's going to do it. Or we like to say things like, if I don't do it properly, no one else can do it properly. So we attach all these values to ourselves that things couldn't operate properly around us without us. But then it leads to this kind of almost knee-jerk reaction where we feel we have to be involved in everything. We have to point things out to people. And the inverse happens. So what you do is, by exerting too much control, by having your hand on the wheel too much, people become less competent, less capable, less able to take initiative. They become weaker, actually. As a consequence of you being too strong, they become too weak. And then you start to lament the fact that they don't take initiative. So you've really hit the nail on the head there, Melodie. We're almost, because we're kind of addicted to our advice, we're addicted to the value that we feel by being the person that can give that advice, knowing the stuff that the other person doesn't know. We end up in this kind of loop. So that it's really, really hard to do that. And there's actually another point there just occurred to me, where even when people start to learn to coach, right, there's usually like 3 stages that they go through. And stage 1 and stage 2 can be a bit of a trap, and you can feel like it's not working. Because when you start to coach, when you think, yeah, I get this, I'd like my team to step up, I'd like my people to do more, I'd like to see them take more initiative. What we end up doing, first of all, we start to ask really complicated questions. So, the question's almost so complicated that then you have to ask a second weaker question. You're like, well, I suppose what I mean is, have you thought about da 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 da? And then they're still looking confused. And then you might ask a third, and then basically just, oh, look, I'll just do it myself. or
Yeah.
the question that you finally ask basically gives them the answer. And that's like phase 1 of when you're trying to learn to coach. And then inevitably what happens is phase 2 is when you start to ask leading questions to get them to say the thing that you want them to say. So you're trying to get them to say the right answer, and the right answer, of course, being your answer. So, and a lot of people think that's coaching too. So they'll say, hey, have you thought about trying it this way? Or have you looked at this thing here? And then sliding it directly under their nose. What about this idea here? It's pretty directive. And I think
Yeah.
when you realize that doesn't work, you either give up, or you kind of go, look, I try to coach people all the time. But then when you actually listen to the language, there's an awful lot of how can I, you're asking questions which directly involve you, right? So the end of that journey, if you stick with it, is asking more brief, short, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? And coaching is really effective when it's simplified down to that core kind of discipline of asking questions, let the other person do 80% of the thinking. So the control piece is there, even in the transition when you're learning to coach, that ego, that desire, that kind of not able to let go, that those 2 phases, I see them all the time. And it's almost like even that in itself, you're like, oh, well, I tried to coach and they don't want to do it, so I've just stopped. So yeah, it's really, really good point you made.
That thought actually brings up a question from my end, for you. When I was just starting into leading people, and I found, for me, just my personal journey in that, for the first 3 years, I found I swung in that pendulum from not really being conscious of not being a micromanager, but
Yeah.
I found I actually went too far, and I was really too hands off. And I think, my question is, how do you balance that line between, you need to be there enough to support, but I don't want to smother. So I found it challenging, actually,
Mm.
not to then ask the maybe directive questions, to try and lead them if they looked lost. How do you gauge that?
Yeah, well, there's like, if you don't mind, there's like two answers to the one question. So the first part, and we touched on this in one of the previous episodes, is around using that kind of training, mentoring, and coaching mechanism to go, well, what is it I'm looking at, first of all? So before, like, because coaching is not the only answer, it's not like the perfect solution to every problem. It's a really effective solution when coaching is needed, right? But then you've also got training and you've also got mentoring. So if they literally don't know what to do, then it's not a coaching problem. It's a training problem. And it's, if they need to build their confidence and competence up and develop their skills and take a bit more responsibility, then it's probably a mentoring thing. So the first question we all need to ask when confronted with any situation is, what am I looking at? What's the actual issue in front of me? Is this person not able to do this because they literally don't know how to do it? Well, then it's unfair to coach someone if they've never been given the training, right? Because it's like the example I often give is, if I said to someone that's never made a lobster thermidor before, if I say, make me a lobster thermidor, and they go, I don't know how to do it, and I say, how do you think you could do it? It's really unfair. So, it'd be reasonable for them to say, give me a recipe. Can we make it together? Maybe you could show me what good looks like. Is there a video I could watch to see someone making lobster thermidor? If you take my point. So, you can't coach someone that doesn't have the basic fundamentals of competence or confidence around something. So that's kind of like part one to that. What you're describing is something I see is really common. Is this kind of, it's almost like a volume scale on those old-fashioned stereos, like a slider, or left speaker, right speaker, and we veer from micromanagement, to your point, where we obsessively have to control every element of everyone else's work for us to feel better. And then the other end of that sliding scale is like blind trust, where it's like, oh my God, I've given them responsibility, I hope they don't mess it up. And I would say coaching is slap bang in the middle of those two extremes, because coaching you don't really need to trust people with coaching. Okay. And I know that sounds odd because, we talk a lot about trust in leadership and that kind of stuff, but coaching as a discipline is fundamentally, at its core, it's evidence-based. So you're always looking for the evidence. You're not looking for it because you need it. You're asking the person to provide evidence so they can validate the success of what they've done, or look for areas that they can improve it. So the reason that coaching sits in the center is because it's evidence-based. You're not blindly hoping that it's going to be okay, and you're not holding on to and controlling every single piece of it. You're saying, I know you've got this, and the best way for you to feel good about that is for you to show yourself and me that you've done it, and then we can learn from what you did to allow you to move on to that next phase. And it might be the next phase is a training thing. So it could be you get to here, they start to fulfill their potential. Then you go, okay, now we need to add some more skills and knowledge. So now we're going to go into a training mentoring loop for a little while. Then you might go coaching again. So really, it's not necessarily just about coaching, although I know that's the topic of our chat today. It's the diagnosis, and it's always coaching first, right? Because coaching is going to present the evidence about whether they have the skill or not. So it's always really coaching first. But you're using that to then go, well, now that I've asked the questions, what's going on here, and then what's the appropriate response?
I think that's a helpful way to frame it. I think it sounds like really going into these coaching scenarios, again, with that I know nothing mindset. So you're not going in with that bias thinking you already know where the person's at, and really trying to understand where they're at.
There's a very deep connection to then micromanagement. So if you're thinking of the answer that you would do or that you think is right, then you're not coaching at that point. I mean, I remember being really challenged when I did my first coaching qualification. My coach in that process wouldn't let me take notes, and I was like, how do I have a conversation if I'm not allowed to take notes? And it's like it's not your. He remember saying to me, he's like, it's not your problem. What are you writing down? I was like, I don't know. I want to say cool stuff. I want to give advice, all that kind of stuff. He said, you need to learn that discipline of just listening. Just listen to what the person's actually saying, and respond once you've had chance to listen and hear, the way that people draw that distinction, like listening and
Yeah.
hearing. And even over dinner last night, I was talking, I really appreciated the candor, because I talked to one of the guys we've been working with over the last couple of days, and he said, like, he'd ask questions and I'd answer them, but I don't think he agreed with my responses. And he sort of said, I realize now, talking to you, that perhaps it's not that I even have to agree with you. I needed him to agree with everything I was saying, but more that he realized he wasn't even properly listening, because he already had his own thought process around what I was saying. So he'd almost formulated his answer. He was asking a question to validate his answer, rather than to hear what I thought about something. And again, it's not that I needed to be right in answering those questions, or even that I was. It's just we don't have the ownership of the problem. That's really the fundamental, like where we started our conversation. That, I know it sounds like a really simple thing, but the more you think about that, it's huge. It's profoundly important in understanding what coaching really is. Because if you know it's not your problem, you don't worry about it. You don't do anything about it. You don't advise on it. You don't take responsibility for it. And the minute you don't do that, then you're liberated to be just completely calm and impartial and focused on the other person. It's just super hard. And I know it sounds simple, but that's the hardest thing about coaching.
It reminds me of a line I heard, and it was care, not carry, or care, don't carry.
I like that.
And so just our discussion here reminds me of that. I really like that thought process of, this is not my problem. However, you're here to support how you can without carrying the burden, and how freeing that can be then, if you don't feel like you've got to put everybody's challenges, issues, conflicts on yourself, but you can still care.
Absolutely. Kindness is central to all of this, and, thinking about the other person. And that's precisely why it's so important. Like the last thing someone that needs coaching needs is someone else that's in the problem with them. Right? What they need is, they need the doctor, they need the third party, they need the calm, clear-eyed objectivity of coaching, because you're just asking the questions that serve the person best. They don't need another person in the trouble with them or in the challenge with them. What they need is you to coach. And that means you have to, it's incumbent on you not to own the problem by telling them what to do. The best thing you can do for them is create that environment where they can solve this for themselves and really start to fulfill the potential that they absolutely have.
This is a great conversation, Rob. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I absolutely loved this conversation. When we think about coaching, I really liked Rob's analogy of teaching somebody to drive, and thinking about that coaching phase as actually letting go of the wheel. I think that's just a powerful image to hold in our minds. And the words to go along with it is, this is not my problem. I think if I had that phrase in my head, for some of my former situations in just coaching people or thinking I was coaching people, I think it would have really helped me to not take on the other person's issues or problems or challenges that they were faced with. So I had used the phrase care, don't carry. And I like this idea of, you can care for the person, but you don't have to care about the problem. And I think this idea of not going into a situation with a preconceived notion helps you to not go in with what I fondly term the advice monster, of going in, asking directive questions because you think you know what the issue is, but go into those conversations and situations again with that mindset of, I know nothing, and listen to the other person to better understand where they are. Because then the next step might be, actually, they're not ready to be coached. They either need more training or they need more mentoring. But really thinking about that phase when you're working with somebody else of, letting go of the wheel and seeing how you can support appropriately from there. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.